everybody. I hope you've had a great day so far. I'm super excited to be here and just kind of chat with you guys as we all continue to share our passions and expertise in all these areas of sustainability. I'm Megan Topham. I joined the University of Houston Clear Lake last May. So I'm fairly new to the university as well as to the Houston area. Prior to coming here, I was a full time faculty at NSU Florida in Fort Lauderdale, teaching in our Master in Public Administration programs, as well as our nonprofit and real estate development. And then prior to that, I opened and managed a satellite campus for the University of Texas at Arlington in downtown Fort Worth. And really, in that sphere, I honed my passion for sustainability and was really able to have the autonomy to explore tons of different avenues, whether it's operational, academic through program and research and community partnerships, but really have been lucky enough to wear many hats in that area of sustainability. And so, today, just touching on one small bit of the reuse, recycling, and waste diversion. So first, just thinking about, what are the types of waste? And I know you've had some conversations already today, and so I won't spend too much time on this. But when we look at, the origin of waste through all of our mining practices, the agriculture industry, which, really has about 18 times higher than the other streams, especially within the municipal solid waste, a heavy producer of a lot of our waste streams. And then we have the household, commercial, and government bodies, which entails our municipal solid waste. And that's our garbage, whether it's from our house, from our businesses, hospitals, things of that nature. And then construction and demolition and wastewater treatment. So the agriculture and the construction and demolition categories are about comparable to the municipal solid waste production. But for the sake of our conversation here, we're going to stay within the realm of municipal solid waste. So that's the area where, we have greater control. We can, whether it's through our municipal programs for residents, but also through government and things like that. First, looking at generation of the waste and some disparities that exist within this arena. Currently, we're generating about 2 billion tons of municipal solid waste annually. And this is projected to grow to about 3.4 billion by 2050. And this is globally. So you can see the kind of breakdown here of the different materials that make up this number of, metals, glass, plastic, paper and cardboard being a large sum, but really the organic material here at 44%, making up the bulk of the waste streams globally. When we look at this chart of just thinking about the generation rates between 1960 and 2018. Sorry about that, just hold that thought. In 2018, there was 292.4 million tons, which equates to about 4.9 pounds per person per day of, and I'm just going to start calling it MSW so we don't just keep saying municipal solid waste. So of the municipal solid waste generated, approximately 69 million tons were recycled, 25 million tons were composted. That totals, just under 94 million tons, which is equivalent to 32% recycling and composting rate. An additional 17.7 million tons of food were managed by other methods, and this could be diverted to animal feed. And we'll go into this a little bit more about how some of these materials are recycled, what sort of byproducts come from that, and just generally, as we look at our recycling, what are some of the pros and cons of each of that? Because this isn't a presentation that's going to say that this is 100% the best solution. And we're going to kind of talk about that too. And that's why I love this category of reuse, recycling, and reduction, because there's a hierarchy there of impact. And then when we look at waste composition at income level, I just think this is an important thing to bring up because this is a global challenge and it is a global issue. And so it's important for us to understand not only how does this affect us regionally, how does this affect other communities within our region, and then how does this translate globally? So higher income people not only consume more goods, so obviously have a higher concentration of packaged materials, durable goods like cars, appliances, electronic equipment, But also, waste in middle and high income countries consists of a lot of inorganic materials like paper and plastic. High income countries generate more waste per capita in terms of the aggregate volume. But the developing countries really produce more than half of the total solid waste. So many of the world's highest waste generation rates per person are found in developing island nations. This is strongly where tourism exists, plays a large role in this, where there might be scarcity of land, a critical resource for landfilling, or as you guys learned earlier about all the landfills and the dumping and how that's kind of structured, requires a lot of land and resources. So this can make these countries' waste disposal problems especially acute. And then when you add on top of that the growing climate challenges of rising sea levels due to global warming can really exacerbate this scarcity.
Oh, yeah. So is this graphic based on a country as a whole or the municipal solid waste specifically?
Municipal solid waste specifically.
Okay, so why would we see that in the lower incomes we have more food and green if they're not going through? You said it kind of had the agricultural system. Are we looking at their personal production of waste like that?
It's through the whole system. I'm sorry. So it's not just municipal solid waste, it's through the waste of the agriculture as well. Correct.
Okay, okay.
And it is a little counterintuitive when you first think about it, if why developing countries would have more food waste. But when you look at it as a composition, the higher income countries or developed countries are the greater percentage goes to the packaged and durable inorganic. It's a ratio. It's one of these percentages it's going to be, but it doesn't mean that it's not numbers to numbers from developing to developed.
And then some of those countries are doing the agricultural work for us and taking the hit for us also.
Exactly. Yeah. And now when we think about the impacts of waste of across board, when we think about the sustainability lens of environmental impacts, social impacts, and economic impacts, and really looking at what happens if we're not managing our waste properly. The environmental impacts, obviously, on our air emissions, a significant proportion of greenhouse gas emissions is related to waste. It's about 55% of emissions from landfills from methane. And then we have carbon dioxide at 35%, and several other gases are released in smaller amounts. Waste also contributes, obviously, to contaminating groundwater, aquifers, and surface water, the contamination of soil, which I'm sure you touched on in the landfill conversation, as what happens when all of this contaminants are concentrated in these areas, and injuries to wildlife, noise pollution, eco services danger, and that's thinking about our agriculture, forests, prairie lands, all of these different systems that we utilize for human consumption and for our daily lives. And marine pollution, whether it's through trash that makes its way into these spaces, things that are washed or blown into the ocean, that can really damage the life systems here. And economic impacts, it's important to also notate, I think we can stay in the realm of environmental impacts, and which are substantial, but I think it's important to notate these other areas as well, especially when we're trying to think of comprehensive and holistic solutions. We can't just focus on one area. Looking at job losses from businesses that they're leaving in an area where landfills exist or where there's high concentrations of waste, so it can certainly impact the regional economic development of these areas. Decrease in property values, the neighborhood deterioration from the lack of investment. As again, I'm sure Rowena touched on, this typically landfills go in places where land is cheaper, and these are in communities that are already at a disadvantage. And it's just further exacerbating these challenges that these communities face. Increase the need of public support services, and increases the cost of local waste disposal. And then social impacts, more and more, and I'm super happy about it and excited that when in these conversations around sustainability that we are inclusive of the social impacts and really looking at this sphere equally as we are the environment. Because again, the disparities that exist within this area further exacerbate the other social challenges that we're all facing. They're coming more and more to light and discussed more readily, which is great. But the health issues from breathing in the air from contaminants or even in direct contact with waste, loss of amenities, quality of life from the noise or the pests that waste brings to a community, just the factionalization that happens within communities where, you have the have and the have nots, and the division of these that can happen within communities and impacting social capital and all of these necessary structures that allow people to truly thrive and at least have an equity or an equitable chance to services and to improving their lives. Vulnerable populations may be psychologically affected by having to live near landfills. There's lots of research and conversations happening in this area. Changes in neighborhood demographics and composition, inconsistent access to adequate waste and recycling services. Unfortunately, this is something that is still pretty prevalent. We haven't, as long as recycling has been around, it's far from mastered. And I think it's just an evolving technology, but that's why it can't be the only solution, right? We can't just hang our hat on, we're going to recycle and solve all these problems. It's definitely more complicated and dynamic than that. When we think about our behaviors and how we are purchasing and really looking at an accountability of how we purchase and what we do with items after we purchase them, and having that level of responsibility. I love this. It's on the EPA's website, and I think it's an important visual because it really puts it in perspective of preference on how we dispose of waste. And for the sake of my conversation with you guys today, we're focusing on these two top ones, which are the most preferred. And so we'll kind of talk about. I'm gonna briefly go over each one, but then we'll spend more time talking about these two. So the first, the most preferred is source reduction and reuse. So this is where, we're looking at how do we do things differently? How do we increase efficiencies? How do we look at a product and think about, well, what can this be next? Or whether it's donating or transitioning to a different use, but it's thinking about our processes and technologies. And again, as I said, the accountability of things. And then down the hierarchy of recycling and composting, which I think most of us are acutely aware of this and in theory and somewhat in practice. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then energy recovery, but looking at how we can translate waste into energy. And that's happening in several different areas, and it's a very necessary part of the loop. And then the least preferred method of treatment and disposal. When we think about once things do go to the landfill and how is that done and the impacts of all of that within the entire kind of waste management solutions. So one of the things here on this chart, we can see like between 2017, and I just wanted to show you this visual as we can see that hierarchy broken down into actual figures and numbers. But between 2017 and 2018, there was an increase in the municipal solid waste, but that was more due to how the EPA measured the food specifically, so that the methodology for measuring food was more accurate. And so that's where we could see the bump in that particular area. But municipal solid waste continues to be a high priority for state and local governments, including, source reduction, that we'll talk about some strategies there that are being implemented to really get to the root of the issue. But it includes environmentally sound waste management, whether it's through the combustion for energy, landfilling practices that meet the standards of evolving conversion technologies and things that are happening across board with different materials. Thinking about that kind of second prong from the top of recycling and repurposing, and what does this look like for some materials? When we look at metals, recycling uses a considerable amount of energy, but less than using virgin ore. So sometimes the solution is not the best, but it's better than the alternative. And that's why the momentum or the train can't stop there. It has to keep moving on all sides. Like what is the metals used for? What are alternative uses for? And the source of things. And then also, how do we get more efficient in our processes and for the recycling of the metals itself? But the good thing about recycling metals is that can be recycled over and over without altering its properties. Primary types of recycling metals: aluminum, copper, silver, brass, and gold. Some of the uses for the recycled metals, it's pretty vast. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list by far, but automobiles, aircrafts, appliances, industrial containers, ductwork and plumbing, and then recycled aluminum and steel are commonly reused for new food packaging. And glass, again, also has an unlimited life for recycling. It can be melted and recycled endlessly. Recycling reduces the need for the raw materials, which is, sand, soda ash, and limestone, as well as energy. So to repurpose the recycled glass, the temperature on the furnace doesn't have to be as high as if you're producing it with virgin materials. Some of the recycled uses for new glass products are glass bottles, composite glass countertops, glass tiles and backsplashes, glass asphalt, and beads for jewelry making, and a variety of construction materials. And I'm sure many of you have seen tons of different kind of recycled glass products out there. For me, and mainly within the realm of like the countertops and things like that.
I have a question, Megan.
Yeah.
So, how does the cost compare of recycling glass versus making new glass? Because I was under the impression that it's cheaper to make new glass than it is to recycle it. That was at least a few years ago.
Well, it's so many things go into play for that, right? When you think about the cost of raw materials and the accessibility of some of these things, and these are things that are mined, and so they have their own set of impacts. So I think, looking at it as a holistic system is important. But the cost itself, that is something I can certainly look into and let you know. But
I mean, I guess it's been more than a few years ago. This is when I was in at the university, and I was taking a chemistry class like 20 years ago. And I was just, talking to the professor and saying, why don't we have more recycling in class? And he's like, at this point, it's just cheaper to make it new. And I just wondered if that had changed any.
that's an argument that I think is made a lot of times. And until demand for certain things increases, which I think it has for recycled items, then it is going to be cheaper to do the alternative. Sorry, someone put it in a chat.
Yeah, glass color mix is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, they have to sort. So sorting through this, getting light colors together, and things like that. I mean, it is labor intensive, but thinking about the fact that it does have unlimited life is valuable, and it has a lot of other uses too. When you think about especially in the construction materials, even if it's broken, it can be crushed down to such a point to where it even becomes a raw material again. So that could be part of the closed loop of getting that raw material just from the old glass. To me, that would certainly bring the cost down if I was a manufacturer of glass, whether it be raw materials or one of these sort of end products. But good question. I'm going to look into that. Some things were very, very clear that obviously it still uses a lot of energy, uses a lot of water. And so just being transparent by just not saying, well, recycling's great and we need to do it. I think it's important to understand and ask those questions and know, okay, well, what are these raw materials? What does this world look like, when they're trying to get the limestone and all of these other materials? And it can be overwhelming, when you start kind of getting into the rabbit hole of what's better. And so I don't want the idea of not knowing if you're doing the right thing just stop people in their tracks. So I think it's important to know that the message being that recycling is better than not recycling, but the best solution is to reduce, reuse. If you have glass, then you find a repurpose, you instead of recycling it, repurpose it would be my argument. All right. Plastics. This is, I think pretty much all of us know we've been recycling plastics, and trying to understand what we can recycle, what we can't recycle is very specific to each area and municipality and what's available. But generally, the process for recycling plastic is, collecting the materials, sorting and categorizing, washing, shredding, melting, and pelletizing them to the little beads, and so that they can be reused in different applications. There's tons of environmental and social and economic benefits for recycling plastics. And we've heard about a lot of the negative environmental challenges from plastics finding its way into our water systems and damaging the biodiversity and other ecosystems that they find themselves in. And then recycling can give people an incentive to buy and use more plastics. I would say that is true for whatever the material is, thinking that, oh, well, I'm recycling, so I'm good. I can just consume, consume, consume. That is certainly not the message that I would want to be translated. And especially with plastics, because it's so abundant in our world, whether it's our own food packaging and things that we get through the bags at the store. Plastic is a foundation in our life. And so really thinking about that and even looking around to your own home and just taking in how much plastic exists. And then when you think about what do I do in the end of that life of that equipment or product or whatever it is, thinking about, well, how can you either donate it or find a repurposing opportunity for it. But looking at, and again, for plastics, it does lose some of its credibility when it's recycled numerous times. So it can only be recycled a few times. Some recycled, and they've gotten really creative about a lot of the different products that are made of recycled plastics, even to clothing and animal collars, rugs and mats and shoes. So the list really does go on, and they're finding a lot of different uses for the recycled plastic, even through surfboards and other sort of campaigns that are happening through specific nonprofits and groups that are really trying to do something with specific plastic materials. And paper and cardboard, generally paper is separated, and that's the kind of thing generally for people to recycle, it's got to be easy. And so a lot of the back end stuff is not really discussed on how labor intensive recycling and energy intensive recycling can be. But yes, so separating the papers, they're baled and shipped to mills, cleaned, dried, and rolled into other pieces of cardboard or recycled paper materials. Paper products have a lifespan of about 5 to 7 recycling processes. Some of it takes a lot of water to recycle the paper, but despite the negative impact, the pros continue to outweigh the cons. Using office paper, tissues, napkins, papers. I think we see recycled paper products throughout our operation. Like for me, given that I'm here at the university to manage a sustainability institute, I have to be hyper aware of the materials that we use. So investigating what sort of office paper are we purchasing? What is the recycled content? It is very labor intensive just on the part of the consumer to educate yourself and ask, the important questions. How much post-consumer waste versus pre-consumer waste, and understanding the differences between these things. But making sure that we're just moving the needle and we're moving in the right direction. Again, don't want to be so overwhelming that folks just don't even consider doing it at all. And concrete, it's got to, when we think about all the mass of construction waste that exists, and concrete can be crushed and impacted. It does take a lot of heavy machinery to do this, but it can be repurposed into other permeable pavings. It can be a base or an aggregate for new asphalt pavings, foundation materials, aggregate for concrete, and can be used to impact runoff, water runoff, and directions of controlling any sort of erosion and retaining walls, privacy screens, and creating ocean reef habitats and things of that nature. If you think about recycling 1 ton of concrete or cement can save 1,360 gallons of water and 900 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen the mass landfills of just tires, right? It could be overwhelming if you ever see this, and it's quite depressing to me because you just where tires go to die. I think this technology has been evolving and understanding the uses of rubber and what happens to rubber when it's recycled, because it does require a lot of heat So it's a really labor intensive process of recycling tires, of being able to remove the steel wires that are in there, breaking them down and cleaning them, and then again making them into, they can be made into different kind of base materials for depending on what their end use could be for the recycled content. But you've seen a lot of playground mats are made out of the recycled rubber. We have fuel. I mean, for what happens when you have to heat the rubber and burn it, you can capture that heat for energy and other aspects there. But it is important to have a closed loop when you're thinking about introducing fire, because they're also used for controlled fires. But then you think of the off gases from that. So it's, again, all has to be considered and addressed as a closed loop when, if you're not just wanting to get one thing, but if you can get all the byproducts from the process, then that's the goal. 300 million tires are scrapped annually, and most of them are put in a landfill. And a lot of times these tires can be retread or repurposed and reused. So really thinking about different streams that this product can be repurposed. And then food and agriculture. I mean, there's a lot of creative things happening in this arena. I just put a few examples up here for you. So some of the byproducts of creating beer, you have like this mash. And so this company, Regrained, has created this bar out of the byproduct of making beer. And so there's a lot of cool kind of local collaborations happening in this area, because obviously you can have a direct link to your raw material if you can create these sort of synergies and connections. The mushrooms are coming from food pulp, and so they're making different sort of composting materials for these in-home mushroom growing kits. And then a Nomad makes those teas out of coffee husks. So, having these kind of collaborations with local industries, I think is super creative. I mean, I think a lot of folks, even when we thought about like grease and oil from restaurants and repurposing that into fuel and other means. So I think this has been going on a lot, but thinking creatively about, in your specific region. And what I love about, this specifically is just the focus on local and how you can make local impacts, and looking at what your distribution of waste is specifically to your area, and then thinking creatively about solutions for that. Now to the pinnacle of like what's the most important, or what is the most preferred method of handling of waste management, and that is reducing waste, and thinking about, really innovative ways to encourage and incentivize people to be able to do that. If we look at procedures or practices that people will follow, and this could be, preventative maintenance programs, inventory control systems. This is where we're really creating that efficiencies with our equipment and our processes, whether it's, we're looking at water conservation measures, employee incentive programs, things that are going to be tied specifically to what people do. And really a lot of the education component of it. The processes and equipment should be more efficient. Looking at improving our process efficiencies through retrofitting, and whether you're putting, again, maintenance schedules and upgrading. We've seen this with large universities moving over to LED lighting and what that does and how that can have a ton of energy savings for a university. But various retrofits through water fixtures and things like this, and looking at how we can make a huge impacts with certain areas. Upgrade to new, more efficient equipment, train staff on proper equipment operation. I think that's a huge, a lot of times we'll build things and then we won't really let people know how to use them right. I think that happens a lot with LEED buildings and green buildings, so to speak, right? That, they have all of this kind of functionality and opportunity, but if the users aren't part of that process, then a lot of times there can be a disconnect. So I think the education component is huge. Dedicate process for equipment, for different materials and color types, and being very specific on not grouping everything together and being very specific about how things impact are different for the material or whatever category it might be. And then ongoing process evaluation, which again, huge proponent. We have to have continuous improvement. It's not a one and done where we just implement it and we assume that it's doing everything that we intended it to do. And then products or chemicals to make something safer. So we're going to optimize solutions concentration. This is companies looking at how can we do what we do in a more environmental and sustainable way. Evaluating product formulation needs. Again, technology is a constant. And so continuously evaluating those materials to make sure that, we are using the most environmental friendly method and raw materials. And are those materials still needed, or are there alternatives that can prolong the process and solution for the solution life of the product? And all of this really is to say, moving towards and wanting to really create this circular economy, transforming our take, make, waste kind of linear process of getting something, using it, and throwing it away to, again, asking ourselves, how do we manage this resource? What can we do with the end result? And how do we make and use our products? And what do we do with the materials after we're done with them? It's a model of production and consumption that involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling those existing materials and products as long as we possibly can. And we've seen a lot, and that's why it's like net zero. So it's like, we've heard this term net zero, and this is really the idea that we're going to consume only as much energy as produced, and achieving a sustainable balance between whether it's water availability and demand, waste that's actually sent to landfills, and the energy that is consumed. So net zero water, net zero energy, net zero waste, and even getting into a more micro level of looking at net zero plastics. We'll just take energy, for example. It's not saying that we're not going to consume any energy. It's that we're going to offset the energy that we do consume through other measures by containing. And a lot of this is right now is done by carbon offsets and other sort of tools and things that exist. And same with plastic. It's not saying that we're not going to use any plastic. It's saying that with the plastic that is used, that we're going to.
Can I use this moment to ask you a question?
Please.
We're looking at ways to reduce or optimize processes and stuff, and it would seem like it was really directed towards industry or large corporations and stuff.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of local policies or anything that like encourage the individual? Because that's what we were trying to figure out, how to do that.
Yep, I have a slide right after this one that's going to talk about a couple of those. So perfect.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. I love it. But really thinking about net zero, it's just offsetting the outputs, the negative environmental impacts, the negative emissions, the part of plastic that's not being able to actually be recycled. What do we do with that? And ultimately, all of the carbon dioxide that is created, finding a place for it, getting it back into the ground where it was. And so I think that's traditionally what all of the kind of net zero processes are, or the commitment for it. So it's not saying, again, we're not going to produce any waste, but it's saying we're not going to send waste to the landfill. We're going to find ways to get those other layers of the hierarchy for what we do with waste management. So now how do we change our behaviors through policy? Traditionally, this is done by money, by municipalities, or creating policies that charge the individual for, like the first one being this advanced disposal fee. So this is where you pay up front for the waste you're about to create. And this is an example of this is the plastic bag tax. 30 countries have a plastic bag tax to help reduce the waste and help save the environment in this particular area. And then you have the term or the concept as pay-as-you-throw taxes, so that even if it's as sophisticated as your trash is weighed and you have to pay for the amount of waste you've created. So traditionally, if we look at human nature and what has changed behaviors, it's when people can see it's directly impacting them, whether it's through time, money, some sort of affiliation of their experience that's negative. And a lot of times when what's happened and why people, maybe have not chosen to recycle and just throw things in the landfill is because it's been cheaper. It's been cheaper to just dump things into a landfill. But until we kind of change that model, that and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do because recycling is expensive as well. But looking at how do we incentivize the behavior and the actions that are needed for us to make more sustainable choices, and looking at things like this through policy. But when we look at even, for me, when I'm challenged as the lead of a sustainability initiative, how do I get a group of faculty, staff, and students to look at themselves and think, well, I want to do something more, I want to do something different. And it can take more of their time. It's not something, when you add anything, as you guys know, everybody's already doing a lot with a little. So if you sometimes even add just a little bit more, it can be too much. So how do we together, how can we, for me, it's been this culture, like trying to just create this culture of connection and commonality to where we're all in it together. And I think, when you can have a closed system like we do, obviously, as a university, I have that flexibility to look at it that way. But when you grow past that and you're thinking about cities and counties and municipalities and regions, it's really when we get into these policy changes and these impacts that are going to directly impact citizens and residents. And I'm happy to have a dialogue about it of what you guys are experiencing in the classroom.
I think a lot of it makes sense, but I guess a lot of them are like, instead of incentives, I guess they're the negative.
Yeah, it's the stick, not the carrot.
Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York, and like everyone there, like we had to purchase stickers to put on our clear plastic bags. It would only pick up the garbage that had these unique stickers on them, and then they had to look through them. But the only thing is, it was rural New York, so the way that some people got away with not doing it was they just burned their trash instead, which was
Right.
not ideal either, because now you're burning things. I just didn't know if there's any creative, like any other place around the world is doing.
And that's the thing. A lot of places are doing a lot of different things. When you think about islands, so to speak, and even like I took some students to a study tour in Australia and New Zealand, and a lot of places this is just second nature. They're not thinking about recycling or are thinking that it's a burden. It's just a way of life. And it's because their resources are limited and fixed. In Texas, we have this mentality. We have so much land, we have all of this space, and it takes change a little slower to happen, unfortunately, until people can feel it themselves. And then you have that, even on the flip side, we're thinking, well, what's in it for me? Sometimes you have to start with the stick before we can get to the carrot. I think the carrot happens in the house, right? Where maybe there's other on a micro level from other folks. Like I get to do things more with the carrot within our closed system of the University of Houston, Clear Lake. But that's just one little organism.
Do you have any I remember it was a couple of years ago, Austin tried to like ban the plastic bags.
Mm-hmm.
And then that backfired, and they were I don't know, were they sued or what? And I thought, and then they reinstated it, I guess, or something. I don't know what happened exactly, but I thought that was weird. Like, I don't know if any of y'all shop at Costco. Like, everyone knows if you're going to Costco, you're not going to get a bag. And there's no bags, and no one argues, and no one complains.
Yeah.
Was it litigation?
That was actually lobbying by the plastic bag manufacturers to the Austin legislature to sort of say, no, we don't want this thing to be allowed. So they went back on the Republican principles and said local municipalities couldn't decide that their local policies, and you weren't allowed to ban plastic bags. So that was.
And then there's then if you shop at Trader Joe's, all of their like plastic bags to put the produce in are compostable, made out of cellulose. I don't understand why that hasn't caught on.
May I take that, Megan?
Yes, please.
Well, well, I mean, we at Envirothon have tried to use compostable plates and cutlery, and I think the truth is, you know, those things are compostable, but only if it's a special program for composting. It's not compostable in your backyard compost pile. It's not compostable in with the rest of your kitchen garbage. It actually requires a special process to break down.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have our Envirothon plastic cups that we bought probably 10, 15 years ago. I still see pieces of them in my backyard compost when I'm composting.
Yes.
They're broken down, but they're still there.
And with the money we spent on them, we went and we bought some reusable, just stainless steel, put them in the dishwasher, catering packs of cutlery. And we reuse those year after year after year. And we've probably saved quite a bit of money not going back to buying compostables or even recyclables.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of making the best choice you can that's available. You know, I agree that, I mean, it's just like that pyramid, you know, yes, I mean, getting things that you can reuse is the most preferred, but you know, the next step down would be recycling and composting. And so I mean, I run into the same issue with creating events and things here. And how do I manage my strategic objectives and my commitment to all of you guys and all of that with the values of sustainability? And so it's just a constant balance. And another thing is you can't be lazy about it either. I mean, you have to, just because maybe I do research right now about what's available, it doesn't mean the next time I'm there, it's the same thing. So it's just, it's an evolving process.
It comes down though to a lot though, again, equity, like people can't
afford it.
Some things. And then on top of that, like everyone, I feel so proud of myself carrying my reusable bags to the grocery store. But then when I have to buy limes, jalapenos, or whatever, I have no option but to use more little plastic bags. And then and if you don't do it that way, then you have to get prepackaged vegetables that are in like saran wrap and a styrofoam container. Like, I guess I don't understand why I get mad, because there's like, it doesn't seem like the simple things are changing, but I don't know where that comes from, because yes, you can say it's the individual consumer making educated decisions, but then one, there's not education. Two, if they try to educate at an early level, then some group is going to say that we're brainwashing children. Three, it's not even, the options are absolutely limited. I don't know.
And that's when this policy comes into play, because if the demand can't present itself for the companies to make these choices and these changes, then they have to be mandated to do so. And so it eliminates the choice of the consumer, because if you go into the grocery store and there's either you have to bring your own, bags to even collect your vegetables in, or they have items there that are reusable that you have to purchase, whatever the system is, if that's not just what's available, then you're going to know that there's a choice. Until there's like no choice in this particular arena, which is going to be driven by policy and regulation.
Well, I must say, when I first came over to Texas, one of the biggest culture shocks was how much trash you're actually allowed to put out. And it was collected twice a week. Where I was living before, it was a fortnightly collection for household waste, and all your recycling was picked up separately. Each, the glass was separate from the aluminium cans, was separate from the cardboard and paper. At that point, we didn't have plastic recycling. And, they got picked up once every 2 weeks, and you were given a container, and you weren't allowed to overfill that container. That container was how much you were allowed to put out. So it really made you think about how much trash you were creating. I mean, if you wanted to get rid of more, you had to drive down to the city, the council dump yourself and put it in the particular containers, which was, just an extra hassle.
Is that based on family size though? So like if a family of, if you have a family of 10 versus a family of 3, they got the same size.
It's unfair. Yes, there was a lot of people putting trash into other people's wheelie bins on trash day.
They like shared, like
Yeah.
it builds a community.
And also the messaging that the waste bin is bigger than the recycling bin. You know, if that were to be reversed, then I think people would spend more time actually considering what can be recycled.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
I just think we need more choices for consumers. And one thing, I'm not a big fan of Kroger, but I am a big fan that they have milk now in a glass container, a gallon size container, and you pay up front an extra $2 for this gallon of milk, and you rinse it out and take it back, get your money back. So it's kind of like, they used to do that, I think, a long time ago. But I have started going to Kroger just to get milk, if nothing else, because that's the only grocery that's doing that. And it's from a company out of Dallas.
It's expensive, though. It's like $7. Isn't that the one that's like $7 a gallon? And then you get back $2, but you have to pay it $7 up front, and then you have to continuously.
Yes. Yeah, it is a premium milk, but yes,
really
it's
good milk.
But it's expensive.
And it's worth it to me as a consumer. I feel like I have to make a stand on this. This is something that I want, and I'm going to pay for it because I want this option.
Yes, but that's a privileged choice as
we have the privilege. Yes, I was going to say we have the privilege to make that choice. Well, thank you guys for the conversation and for the time. And I had a good time, and hopefully you got something out of it.
Thank you, Megan.